Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Season 2 of The Waystation. I'm your host, Rebecca Darnellis, nobody in particular, and also just like you. In every episode of The Waystation, we explore first-person stories, each told on a common theme, but from vastly diverse perspectives. We'll introduce you to everyday real people whose lives are seemingly different than yours. Or are they? Perhaps through these stories, you may find that you and me and he and she and they and them are more alike than we're willing to admit. And now a thank you to those that make this show possible, my friends at Pioneering Collective. This podcast is powered by Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. Learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. If you are a woman or one who identifies as such, then you may have noticed that the pressure on us to age gracefully is a bit higher than, say, a man. My husband has salt and pepper hair, has had it since I met him at the age of 22, and I found it quite attractive even then. But after my daughter was born, not only did I have postpartum hair loss, but suddenly I had these wiry little white things popping out of my hairline and my eyebrows popping out. It was jarring. Not to mention the fact that my knees snap, crackle, and pop every time I get up from a seated position. But all of these things are things that I should be covering up, with hair dye and makeup and Pilates, because how dare I walk around with my white hairs and popping knees? However, in direct contrast to how I am perceived because of my aging body and looks is how I mentally, spiritually, and emotionally feel as I have aged. To be honest, the older I get, the more of a badass I feel. My confidence is higher, my radar for bullshit is more in tune, my boundaries are stronger, and I give less and less a fudge what others think of me. Like, who cares if you judge me for saying fudge? Fudge, fudge, fudge. So this age thing, yet another complicated universal thing we will talk about here on The Waystation. I am thrilled to welcome today Mary Vetting, Gabriella Concepcion, and Gregory Halpin, three very real people with very real, very honest, very true stories about their own experiences with aging. I hope you can relate. Thank you so much for joining me in The Waystation today, Gabriella, Mary, and Gregory. I'm super excited to talk about aging. I don't know why I'm excited to talk about it because it is not something that people are usually excited to talk about, but I think it's really interesting to hear these different perspectives and maybe change some people's views on it and feel a little bit more comfortable around the fact that we are all aging. It is an inevitable process. So we're going to start with Mary today. So Mary Vetting is a childcare provider in Manhattan who enjoys reading, traveling, theater, and wine. She was born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, and has lived in New York City since 2005. Mary, whenever you're ready, would love to hear your story and perspectives on aging.
Sure. Thanks. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
Let's see. It's not something I think about a lot. And at the risk of sounding immodest, maybe because people have always said I look younger than I am. So I'm like, aging, not an issue. But I have a somewhat skewed perspective on it in that my maternal grandfather lived to be 96, I believe, and was riding his bike at age 95, and you couldn't break the man's hip. Like, he fell, and the worst he got was a skinned knee, And then my father is 87 and is completely lucid and independent, walks his dog a mile a day, takes his groceries in a cart via bus to his townhouse, up the stairs, so when people are talking about, oh, that person's so old or I'm so old, I'm like, you're halfway through, maybe, but then more poignantly, and on the flip side, my mother died at age 55 from metastatic breast cancer when I was 23. So I do have the other side of the spectrum as well. And I myself was diagnosed at age 34 with breast cancer, though we are not BRCA positive. I feel like that's something people should know, that it's not always BRCA. And so that also was a pivot point in many ways, and has made it so that, I just turned 47 last month. And when people ask my age, I never lie anymore because I didn't have to be this old, I had cancer. And, it would be disrespectful at least, to put it mildly, to be upset about the years I've accumulated when there are so many people, including my mother, that would give anything to still be here. So, but I do, it was a conversation I had with myself. It was I cringe a little bit sometimes when I tell my age because it is considered older. And I think, why am I falling victim to societal pressure like that? It's, age is just a number and I'm lucky to be here. But also it's not something that I think about a ton, but it has snuck up on me a little lately. I'm stiff when I get off the couch or when I get out of bed in the morning, and that's a new and unwelcome addition to my life. And, a little more tired in the evening, a little more gray that I have to cover up at the salon. And it's kind of surprising because I think I don't focus on it too much. I'll look in the mirror and be like, what? And maybe a little bit because my dad has done that. Like he's 87 and he still says, he jokes, I look in the mirror and I say, get out of the way, old man. I got to brush my teeth. So I come from a long line of people that do that, perhaps. So primarily it's not a problem for me and something that I try to remind people because I have that very significant event in my life and that I didn't have to be here. I had breast cancer and lived to tell the tale, 12, 13 years later, and is still something I'm really grateful for every day.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. Also grateful to have you here today. I love that you never lie about your age. I think that's really important as a woman. I don't lie about my age either. I actually have a number of times on this show mentioned the fact that I'm 39 years old. And I know a lot of my peers are like looking at it as I'm almost 40. But I think there's a lot of wonderful things that come out of aging that women specifically should be embracing more than what is put on us. We're supposed to be hiding our grays and using thousands of dollars of, creams to get rid of wrinkles and all of that stuff. And, the societal pressure adds a lot more to the experience than the actual experience of aging. My knees also creak when I get up off of the couch or playing with my toddler on the floor. And then I have to get up and I'm like, oh, crap.
Yes, you're just a little stiff for a minute.
Totally get it. I totally get it. And I think also having that perspective, I mean, of course, I would never wish anyone to go through having cancer, but I think that having to confront death, especially at such a young age, you said you were 34 years old, it's gotta shift your perspective and shift how you relate to aging and how you relate to ultimately when we're talking about aging, I think the fear is really of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what we're talking about. Like inevitably we're all going to die. And anything that we can do to resist that idea is what, we're going to have marketed to us. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Gabriella and Gregory. Gabriella, if you want to go first in what you related to in Mary's story or anything that stood out for you.
Hi, Mary. Thank you for sharing that story. It's really interesting to hear that you have both sides of the coin there. I actually want to respond a little bit to what Rebecca just said about that fear of dying part. For me, I'm just like, it's aging. It's more of like a fear of failure. What if I get to a certain point and I'm not where I wanted to be or what I thought I should be or who I thought I should be? Back to Mary, I actually don't know a lot of older people who are super healthy. So it gives me I'm actually inspired and I'm hopeful when I hear that you have relatives that are much older that are in such great health. Everyone I know, most people I know, relative wise, really depend on other people and care. So it's a little inspiring to hear that there are people out there that don't need as much care and can really live fuller lives when they're in their late 80s, late 90s. That's pretty.
It's another thing for which I'm grateful every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Gregory, what about you?
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was very inspiring because and I'll share later, but I can relate to the cancer part of it. It was very inspiring to hear that. And someone had mentioned something about aging, women and aging in our society. It's definitely problematic. And I can't really begin to understand what that means. But as a gay man in our community, I do see a lot of ageism. So it's very interesting how that all plays out.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for going first, Mary. Gabriella, did you have something that you wanted to say? You just raised your hand.
Yeah, back to the societal pressures about using the creams, Rebecca. I actually have an older cousin who told me that I should start wearing eye cream when I was like 20, I think. And now I've started to use eye cream and I'm like, okay, I guess I should probably start paying a little bit more attention to my skincare. But yeah, that's just, never really thought about that.
Or not.
Or not.
Or not.
I have to say, I have a container of moisturizer in every room just to kind of like remind me, okay, you need to moisturize today because your skin is cracking a little bit.
Yeah. I think we need to get my husband on that train. I'm like, you need to moisturize. He never moisturizes. But I also keep like moisturizer in every room, especially for my hands, because I feel like...
I was going to say, I am never without moisturizer for my hands. It's in every bag, every pocket, every room, but only my hands.
Yeah, well, but especially during this pandemic, because you're always using like sanitizer and washing your hands probably a lot more than I used to wash my hands, honestly. So it's like you have to moisturize them. Thank you so much, everyone. So now we'll move on to Gabriella. Gabriella J Concepcion is an artist, director, and producer born in Brooklyn, New York, and currently also based in New York City. Gabriella, whenever you're ready.
Hey, thank you, Rebecca. So aging, I would say right now as a 26-year-old, my view of aging is that it's just a scary, pressure-filled privilege. There's a lot of like hope and mystery about what the future is going to be, but it's also just, you're like old enough to feel that like cynicism where you're like, oh, am I just being ideal about everything? And there's just so much fear around it. Like I can remember this clearly. When I was like 16, I was in a high school health class and we were looking through our like health textbook and it was a child development chapter. And there was this timeline across the page and you can see like a baby and then a toddler, a kid, a teenager, a young adult, older adult, and then a senior citizen. And underneath each little picture, and these weren't even like cartoon pictures. They were like, they had taken real pictures, like photo stock pictures and put them like on top of the descriptions. But underneath it had a little summary of like where that age group should be in their life. And it had like little bold points. So this is what they should be like in terms of, I forgot what it was, like maybe health-wise, but then there was like a section for like relationships, like where should they be in their relationships, like their language development, yada, yada. And that like timeline just stayed seared into my brain, especially like the young adult, like it was like a 30s to 40s of like, now they're like thinking about children and like families and like life partnerships. And early 20s was like thinking about career and starting to think about, you know, relationships, but more career driven. And it just, I subconsciously, although not entirely subconsciously, because I can still see that exact little timeline in the health book, I based what I thought my future was going to look like on top of that. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be a career driven person when I'm in my young 20s, but I'm also going to go out there and I'm going to like have fun and I'm going to meet new people and I'm going to explore and experience different things. But then like 25, like 27, 28, like I'm going to really settle down. I'm going to find that person. I'm going to get married by 29. I'm going to have kids by 30. And then past that, it was a little bit more mysterious, but I was like, oh, it's okay that it's mysterious because then my plans are going to combine with somebody else's plans. We're going to make plans together. Just lots of plans. And then COVID happened and I realized that there's no plans are out the window. So the pandemic happened when I had just turned 20, like a little after I turned 23, maybe 24. And I was living in Brooklyn and I was like hanging out with people, making new friends. And then I was confined to my apartment and I wasn't really able to go out or meet people. And just life got a little bit smaller. And I was comforted by the fact that all the other people I had graduated with in college, like their careers were on hold too. Because I went to school for musical theater. So like Broadway was shut down, theater was shut down. And there was a piece in that because I was like, all right, we're all on the same page now. Like there's a little bit more of a calm down. But other plans, like the relationship plans, just they were put on hold because you couldn't meet anybody, you couldn't see anybody, you couldn't hang out with anybody. And career plans changed too, because like obviously like businesses change and, you can't really go work out, in places if places are closed. I expected my life to be different. And after the pandemic, I'm older now and everyone still keeps telling me that, I feel like I missed the boat. I'm like, my mid-20s, that was going to be the end of my partying. And now I'm supposed to be focused, but I didn't get a chance to do the end of my partying. Not that I was someone who really partied, but I thought I'd have the opportunity. It's just gone, or at least it feels gone. I'm like, when I go back to a bar, will I know the songs that are playing? Will younger people who are just going to a bar for the first time look at me weird? Life didn't pause for them. I'm older now. Yeah, so plans are a little out the window. And when you're young, people are always like, oh, you're young, you'll figure it out. You're young, you'll figure it out. I'm like, okay. Well, I'm about to be 27. At what point do they stop telling me I'll figure it out? At what point will it flip over and be like, well, you have to take responsibility and you have to settle down and make these choices? And I don't know, there's just a lot of fear of the timeline. I just have to look at it now as, okay, where do I want to be instead of where I thought people thought I should be, I guess. So that's where I am now. It's less of a plan and more of embracing the now and the randomness. And, there's so much going on. There's very little you can count on. So in the moment, I want to count on what brings me joy, which is hard when you're still trying to make plans and form a career. And that's kind of where I'm at. It's still developing.
Yeah. Thank you, Gab. So much of what you said, first of all, I related to because, I was in my 20s at one point. And also so much of it is stuff that I still experience, right? I still feel like I need to be making plans and where I'm supposed to be in my 40s and I should have a house. There's always something that you think that you should be having by a certain point, no matter how much of a controversial person you can be or if you don't buy into a lot of that stuff. And I think also, we were looking at your bio and you're an artist, and immediately when you graduate from with a musical theater degree, right? You're not necessarily going to follow the same trajectory as a lot of other people because there's not a lot that's planned out in the theater world, in the film world, right? It's a lot of luck and who you know and all that bullshit. So I think that there's also that added layer to it, right? When I graduated from college, also with a theater degree, a lot of my friends were getting married and buying houses and moving down the street from their parents. And, I was working in restaurants and, auditioning during the day or totally hungover for half of the day. So it is just a different path. But, the things that I think everyone can relate to is being told in your 20s, oh, you're young, you'll figure it out. You're young, you'll figure it out. And I've probably said that to people in their 20s, you're still young, it'll work out. But I know when I was in my 20s, I didn't want to hear that. I wanted to know exactly how it was going to work out and when. Give me a timeline, right? But in my experience, that hope and that mystery and that cynicism and that wondering, am I being an idealist? That doesn't go away. At least for me, it has not. And I don't know about Mary and Gregory, but, always feeling like you need to be on some sort of timeline and wondering what the next phase is. Nobody has control over that. So thank you for sharing. I'd love to hear from Gregory and Mary. Gregory, if you want to go first, what stood out to you or you related to?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me was 26 years old. I'm I'm 52. It's not really that old, but I'm realizing I'm at that age where I'm oh, that person is so young. Or, I never thought he's saying things like that, but I am, and it's cool. And also one other thing that stood out was how organized you are with planning. At this age, I'm going to succeed. I'm going to do this. And by this age, I'm going to do that. And I'm that just... when I was in my 20s, I was definitely all over the place, scattered, a musical theater artist as well. So I'm that's just cool to hear when people can do that, when they have those kinds of plans. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's good to have markers, right? This is where I want to be, but also not be so beholden to them, right? Because there could be even better things out there than your silly markers.
I feel like what I learned through this pandemic is that my markers aren't, solid. Like they're not, there's very little in reality. There's not so much that we have control over. So I think the hardest thing was going, maybe I don't want to be married by 29. I don't think I'm ready for that. Or will I even meet someone that I would want? What's this timeline that I'm putting on myself? So there's a constant okay, maybe not. Maybe this is not good. But then there's but if I don't have this, I won't stay on track. But yeah,
it's a balance.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me was when you said you sort of encapsulated where you're at right now in your 20s as being pressure filled. And you used a couple of other great words, but the one that I wrote down was pressure and I hadn't thought about that in a while because haven't been in my 20s in a while, but that I do remember feeling guilty if I stayed home on a Saturday night because I'm like, what if I could have met my husband out there and I'm doing the wrong thing? And, this is the time I have to do it. And so I relate to what you're saying there. And I thought it was all of the stuff about COVID. I wasn't expecting to be a part of this conversation, but is for sure. Because like you were saying, will I even know the music when I go out? Will other younger people who aren't in their 20s and aren't going out, the pause affected them differently. They weren't bar hoppers and then they had to sit home and then they go back and suddenly people are looking at them strangely. It's their first experience, I thought that was interesting. And I liked that you're being told you're young, you'll figure it out because it's true. And I was told that too, but I was told a fair amount. You're an adult now, take responsibility. So the other side of that isn't very fun either. But thankfully, my mom always joked that I was born 80 years old. So I was like, well, I'll graduate, I'll get a job. It's important that I get benefits. So I'm going to work on that. And it sort of lined up that way. So as much as I'm a worrier and a planner, I also was like, well, I can't predict the future, so I'm just going to figure it out as I go. And yeah, that COVID is the great leveler too, in that we can plan as much as we want and then the world laughs.
Yeah, I think, going back to COVID, everything stopped in the outside world, but we continued to live. And probably for everybody, because it was such a new experience, was some sort of first that they either missed out on or looked completely different than they thought it would be, So for Gabriella, it's going out and meeting new people and experiencing things for the first time. For me, it was having a baby at the beginning of the pandemic and not being able to have the village that was promised to me, right? So I'm curious, actually, Mary and Gregory, as you both obviously continue to live, but, have had, as Gregory alluded to and Mary told us about, experiences with cancer. Was there something in there that either allowed you to have more peace around everything that was going on in the world because of what you had gotten through?
Definitely. It's something that I do sort of lean back on every once in a while, say, if I could get through that, I can get through this, But yeah, I like that you mentioned that you didn't get the village you were promised when Fiona was born, because that is so important and so helpful. And is the reason I think that I sailed through my cancer experience is that the village surrounded me and they wove the safety net beneath my tightrope. And so the people going through COVID, unfortunately, all of us, it was harder for others to come together and weave that safety net beneath our tightrope because we had to stay apart.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Gregory?
The confidence around the cancer kind of ebbs and flows, but for the most part, it did kick my butt into saying okay, you're going to take the world, you're going to take life and just really, go with it and make everything happen that you want to happen. But for the most part, it's pretty much, it ebbs and flows. It's not I don't feel like this certain victorious person. I just feel okay, some days I'm really scared and some days I feel wow, I feel amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I recently read a book about a woman who survived cancer, and I found myself somewhat being jealous of all the things that she accomplished. And I feel almost insensitive saying this, but the things that she accomplished afterwards because she had embraced the fact that she was she could potentially die at a young age. And so it really motivated her to do everything that she wanted to do. And sometimes I feel like I take for granted the fact that, I don't know when I'm going to die. And, there isn't that great motivator. Whereas it should be a motivator for all of us because of the fact that, like I said, we're all going to die. So, yeah,
what's
really
the name of the book?
Between Two Kingdoms, A Memoir of a Life Interrupted by Sulika Jawad.
Yeah, I've been to cancer seminar, webinar things where she's spoken. And she's very, and I follow her on Instagram now. She's pretty amazing.
Yes. And I think she was like 25 when she was
and
diagnosed.
Was really put through the ringer.
Yeah.
Had a really rough go of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the story details all of that too. So Between Two Kingdoms. All right. So let's move on to Gregory's story. Gregory Halpin is the author, photographer, and recipe creator for Craving the Yum, a dessert blog for the home baker. He was born in Syracuse, New York, and currently lives in New York City. A lot of New Yorkers, my hometown, on this episode. Gregory, whenever you're ready, love to hear your story.
Hi, yes. Off topic though, Mary said something about the pandemic being the great leveler. When I heard that, I was like, wow, that is so true. Because that's really what happens. That was cool. So I guess aging, I have this healthy, complicated relationship with aging. If I could put that on Facebook as, relationship status, I probably would do that. But because it's such the center of my life right now. So in 2016, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And before that, I really didn't think too much about aging till that experience. And then the chemotherapy happened. Then after that, I just started to kind of freak out a little bit. But I just switched into this survival gear mode and dedicated myself to therapy and self-care. And so I started to understand my place, my age and my place in the world of aging. And like I said, 52 isn't like too old, but it still feels like, okay, I'm past 50. So where else do I go? It's like they say you're over the hill by 50 or you're midlife. I don't know. It's all confusing when it comes to aging in our society. But I guess the aging also came to the forefront when my mom has dementia currently. So at the beginning, she was fine. And then now you can start to recognize all of the symptoms and everything. And that also is another factor that is kind of bringing up age for me. Like I said, it's a very complicated relationship. But for the most part, I feel really good. I feel really good about my age. And it goes back and forth.
Thank you. Gregory, I'm curious, and actually this could be a question for all three of you, but we'll start with Gregory. When you were younger, what did you think about aging? Like when you were a little kid?
I don't recall that. I remember when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, I would draw pictures of older people, like ladies wearing these long earrings and fancy hairdos, but I don't know where that came from. But that's like the only like reference I have to like older people. But it wasn't until my 20s when I just had moments of it, but I was so distracted that I just didn't really pay any attention to it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It sounds a little bit like when you're a kid, it's almost like this fantasy, right? It's not like an actual part of life. It's, someday when I'm older, I'll have this fancy hair. And I always imagined myself in a power suit, but there was denim in there, right? It was power top and denim on the bottom, super cool, but edgy. So it's just you kind of dream about it.
As a teenager, I do remember when I worked at this Italian restaurant. This was the mid 80s. And I do remember always wanting to hang out with the waiters and the bartender. And I got to do that. And it was cool. We had wine coolers because it was the 80s. And I thought, and I felt so cool being 15 or 16, hanging out with the older people. See, I wanted to be older.
Yeah, totally. For some reason, when I was 12, I thought the epitome of cool was 15. All the boys that I had crushes on were 15 years old, and just the girls, I saw their fashion at 15, and it was only 3 years older than me. And then I became 15 and I was like, all right, that's great. Now I want to be 18. Mary, what about you? What was the impression when you were younger about aging?
I think that it was something to be avoided in terms of middle age. And my mother and all of her friends were my mother definitely, and some of her friends were into aerobics and makeup that hid age and dyeing their hair and that sort of thing. Not to a detrimental degree, but I'm trying to think of when I looked at my mother and her age group, what did I think? It kind of brings to mind too that as modern as we are still in 2022, I am single and I don't have kids. And so when I talk with my friends' kids, they don't know what to do with me. They're like, wait, you don't have a husband? You don't have kids? Am I supposed to call you Mrs. something? Like they are just baffled and don't realize that's an option. So I think that's interesting. And because I'm sure I fell into that category as a child too. When you get older, you get married, you have kids, you become the person in the car, in the carpool that's taking kids to and from school. And maybe a little, I think I might, again, have a bit of a skewed perspective on it in that I come from a big family and sort of helped my mother raise my siblings. And so I was doing that, a lot of the stuff I just mentioned when I was a teenager. I was taking kids to and from school and their music practices and play dates and things like that when I was young, very young. And so when I hit my 20s, I was like, okay, now it's me time finally. And then I think has sort of set the trajectory for the rest of my life. It might be why I'm not married or have kids. I'm like, kind of already did that.
Yeah.
So that has probably affected my view on aging too, that I could say, I was talking to those moms in the carpool, when I was 16. And so, but another thing that when I was thinking about this podcast and aging, that I thought is so interesting is that to this day, my babysitters will be and always will be the coolest people that ever there were. They lived down the street and they might as well have been movie stars, and, like you're talking about like 17-year-old girls. But if I saw one of them with their boyfriend, I thought I was watching a movie or something. And they, just sort of feeling kind of shy and starstruck, and they came over to the house, and and now, like looking back on it, they were babies. They were 17, but the perspective of when you're little, the 15-year-old girls it might as well have been on TV.
Yeah. I wonder when that shift is, right? Because it sounds like when you're little, like you always want to be older and you kind of fantasize about it. And then you become older and all you want to be is younger again.
Yeah,
and why does that happen? Okay, I'm thinking this through. So like with Fiona, right? She's 2 years old and it's, okay, when is she going to be potty trained so I don't have to do any more diapers? And before that's like, okay, when is she going to start walking so I don't have to carry her anymore? And we put these expectations on our children to hit these milestones in their life. And then they're kind of trained to do it for themselves. And so it's always thinking ahead. It's always looking forward instead of respecting the place that you're in right now and really living in the present. Yeah. Gabriella, Absolutely. You raised your hand again.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
I can 100% speak on this. So I told a good friend of mine, she's actually younger than me. I was like, yeah, I'm going on this podcast. I'm going to talk about aging. So we actually went out to lunch the other day and I was like, yeah, like here are the questions. Like, what do you think? Like I asked her, and one thing that we had in common was growing up, if we did something wrong, when like you're getting like kind of chastised by your parents, usually it starts with, you're 16 years old and you're still doing this, or you're like 10 years old and you're acting like this. But the interesting thing about that, and I thought it was just me, but she had the same experience too, they would always age you up. Like if I was 15, my parents would be like, you're 16 years old. If I was 9, they'd be like, you're 10 years old. Like sometimes they would just skip that middle phrase of you're gonna be 16 and just go straight for the age up. And I remember one time I yelled back and I was like, I'm 15. And it's actually, there's this TikTok sound going around now. I don't know if you guys see, or at least I think it's like a meme too, so it might be on Facebook. But
you just expected that we're all on Facebook.
Okay. Older people, it might be on Facebook.
We are.
I'm on Facebook. I remember my friend, she was the only one who's older, because what I was going to say is that like growing up, like I was one of the oldest. So like it was always like for aging, it was always like set an example. Mm. But she had to, oh my gosh, this was back when Kohl's had like computers. Not Kohl's, Kmart had computers like in the front, like free internet. I don't know why they did that or why they stopped, but my local Kmart had like computers in the front that you can log into. And we had to like sneak around because she had a Facebook page. Like, like internet safety was still kind of like finding its way. Like the internet wasn't always a safe place to be. And, it was her secret Facebook profile. Anyway, like I had to wait until I was like 14 in order to get a Facebook profile. Like it was a big thing. Anywho. But there's this TikTok sound going around that the mom goes, I'm going to mess this up. But she's like, you have to hold your bag. And she's, I'm just a baby, like the little kid. And the mom's like, you have to hold the bag. She's like, no, I'm just a baby.
To make your point for you, I am not on TikTok. So I'm glad that you said
I have never been on TikTok.
I remember when Facebook came out and you couldn't be on it unless you had a college email address. So it wasn't that I had to wait. I was like, you're not young enough. You can't be on it.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Do you remember that, Rebecca? Or I'm older than you
I don't remember that.
Can we talk about TikTok for just a hot second?
Sure, because my sister is on it and she sends me hilarious things. So
see, it's actually good. I feel like that I talked to my friend because like this is verified. Like multiple people in their 20s have this opinion. TikTok. I always thought that I'd always be up to date on trends, especially living in the city and like going out in the city. But then COVID happened and like I wasn't seeing people as often where I could be like, ooh, those shoes are cute. Oh, I noticed that this person is also wearing that type of shoes. This must be in style. Okay, I see this. And then I'd go out and buy those shoes. But no, now everything's on TikTok. I have to be on TikTok to know what's happening. And like, I'm like that weird period where I am like super young millennial and like older Gen Z. And they call them Zillennials. I was born in 95. So like it's like 95 to 2000. And I'm like, okay, but there's this huge divide on TikTok of what's millennial and what's Gen Z. And I fall somewhere in the middle where I get these TikToks about millennials talking about how Gen Z just wants to bring back low-rise jeans. We can't let it happen. And then I like get these Gen Z TikToks that are like, ugh, the millennials and their side parts. Like they just need to grow up or get with the program. And it's just TikTok is a weird place. I don't make TikToks. I don't understand how to make TikToks. I just enjoy the content that comes up. But like my TikTok algorithm doesn't even understand where I am on the age spectrum.
So what you're saying is that TikTok is perpetuating the divide of the generations, which is another interesting point to like think about aging is we're always pitted against one another. Like nobody likes millennials. I'm a millennial. We all want to do no work for lots of money. We all want to be part of the Great Resignation, which personally I'm proud of. And, I personally think Gen Z is awesome. Like at least the Gen Zers that I know, they're way more mature than
they're pretty ruthless.
Was. They're pretty like, you gave us a shitstorm and now we're going to do something about it. So I'm really hopeful for like Fiona's generation. But I do want to come back to Gregory's story because there was a point that you made about when you were diagnosed with cancer and realizing like that you needed to focus on your self-care and therapy. I think that's another thing about aging is like, we're not necessarily taught to take care of ourselves when we're younger because we have people taking care of us, our parents. And then, you're kind of thrown into your 20s and your parents aren't taking care of you anymore. And you really have to teach yourself how to be a parent, right? How to parent yourself. So just that sort of like recognition that I need support. I need help. Like this living thing is hard. I'm going to use all the tools that I can get, right?
Definitely. And especially if you come from a family of trauma or from a childhood trauma, it's like you have that whole teaching yourself thing, it just doubles. And then, sometimes it comes later, sometimes it comes early.
Yeah. Something to be mindful about for our children. Like just, we want to take care of them, but also teach them how to take care of themselves, how to love themselves.
Yeah. I love how you put that you have to start parenting yourself. You have to learn how to be a parent, even if you don't have a dependent or a child. You have to parent yourself. Yeah. And that's not only practical things like learning how to do the laundry and stuff, but
like how to make money, how to pay your taxes, but like
the pragmatic things that they should be teaching you, like, how the stock market works or how to file your taxes, like you said. And I wonder if Gregory could relate to this, that I think my dad still is like psychology, that fake science or whatever, like what is a therapist? It was just starting to be acceptable as I was growing up to go to therapy. And I mean, I'm from Michigan, so it might be a little bit different in New York, but it's still sort of something that my father's generation, including him, like rolls his eyes about, And I was brought up Catholic, which is very service oriented. And so it's like, think of others, not yourself. So the idea of self-care in any way, I have to like throw off the idea that it's selfish. And also therapy, well, that soft science, I don't know about that, like, is that important? And I always tell people it's the best thing I ever did for myself. It's the best gift you can give yourself is to go to therapy.
Yeah, I come from that same background too. Catholics, and you keep your issues inside, don't tell your neighbors, even though your neighbors know already. Definitely so much value in therapy. And like, I didn't learn that until later in life, but I'm just really glad I did. I recommend it. I recommend therapy, even just for basic, life challenges.
Yeah.
I will say that one thing about, I think, younger millennials, maybe millennials too, and like Gen Z for sure, is there's a very open conversation about like mental health, like very open. My mom is a therapist, so I never had any kind of therapy. Like I was getting therapized by 2 years old, if we're being honest. Not in a, informed parenting, let's call it. But I will say that I'm definitely grateful for that, because I agree. I think therapy is 100% like worth it and valuable to anybody. Like anyone like going through even quote unquote the mildest of things, because there really is no like comparison when it's your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like your brain doesn't really, go, oh, this person's brain is working at this capacity. Oh, I'm fine. No, like your brain this is me and this is what's happening in my head. So I agree. I'm glad that now like there is like an acceptance of it. Definitely.
For sure. Even back in like 2015, 2016, like the films that I do all have a mental health slant to them. It was really not a conversation then either. And so when we started traveling and, doing these like Q&As and stuff like that, people were like, it really resonated with people. And they were like, this is the first time that I'm seeing the things that I struggle with on screen. And people wanted more of it, which is awesome, which is really great. So thank you all so much. I want to move on now to our rapid fire questions, which is just, some fun questions to ask that you can answer the first thing that pops into your head. Okay. All right. And I will have each of you go first, like for a different question so that you all get in the hot seat. All right. So this first one is for Gabriella. What's the best meal you have ever had, either because of the food itself, the company you were with, or the experience of it?
Okay, I was in Paris and there's this restaurant called Frenchie, I think it's called. We got there as soon as the restaurant opened at maybe like 5 or 6. We left when it closed because, number one, the wait was so long because we didn't think to make reservations, And it was just so many different courses. I tried things that I never would have tried. Obviously, it was French food and it was like a really nice restaurant. And I was with my best friend at the time. Like we were traveling Europe. So I feel like everything had that like haze of perfection on it. So yeah, Frenchie, check it out.
Awesome.
It's very good.
Next time I'm in Paris. Mary, what about you? What's the best meal you've ever had?
Well, the first thing that popped into my mind, and this might not be the best meal I've ever had, but it is a poignant one of sorts, was just recently I had a really good Italian meal at Serafina, a restaurant here in New York. And I think part of the reason that, it was just really delicious, and I had a really good glass of wine with it. And I was just, because I'm not a foodie. So when something strikes me, I'm like, great. But part of the reason it was so, I was actually alone eating and reading a book that I'm really enjoying right now, although it's sort of depressing the hell out of me too. It's called The Hospital, and it's about a small town, rural Ohio hospital that was given to me or recommended to me by a friend, my college roommate, who was from that small town of Bryan, Ohio. So I was sitting outside because of COVID, but I picked this restaurant because it had a tent with a heater and lots of open air. And I was so enjoying my meal and my drink and reading this book about people who were going to the emergency room to get a prescription for ibuprofen so that Medicaid would cover it because they don't have the whatever $7 to buy a bottle of it. And the stark difference between what I was experiencing at that moment and what I was reading really made me stop and think, and just so interesting to me that I got out my phone and, well, I was on my phone reading. So I switched to texting my friends and I was like, you guys, how lucky are we? You know, like, 'cause I would never in a million years have thought that there were people that didn't have an extra $5 to get ibuprofen. But it was a really good meal. And it sticks in my memory because I had some interesting thoughts while I was eating it.
Yeah. Meal plus revelation plus gratitude.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Very well put.
What about you, Gregory, the chef?
Well, I am going to be making some giant chocolate chip cookies today.
I'll send you my address.
Okay.
Send them over.
Can you eat walnuts? Because they're going to have walnuts in it.
I can, yes. Love walnuts.
Okay, good. I will get them out ASAP. I think, and God's honest truth, I'm like, during chemotherapy, it was very hard to eat things for many different reasons. However, when I discovered Stouffer lasagna, I think that was the best meal I've ever had.
That's amazing.
Honestly.
And accessible.
Very.
Right? You didn't have to make a lasagna, which is such a pain to make.
Exactly. And it comes in different sizes, and I always got like the large size, and it was the best.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so validating for me because I don't cook. And so things like that are delicious too. If it's easy and I can warm it up and it's good.
Yes.
So if a chef says that, then great.
Try some Stouffer lasagna. It's amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. This one is for Mary first. What's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
COVID vaccination is necessary.
Oh.
Quite controversial, perhaps.
I wouldn't expect that from you either.
That is necessary.
You believe it. You believe it is to be. Okay, got it.
Yes.
So a lot of people believe that it is not necessary, and Mary believes that it is necessary.
Yes, please underline that. Yes, I was
bold exclamation point.
I thought we were all on the same page on that.
We all got super quiet.
Yeah. Even in New York, where I think we're at 75% fully vaccinated, which is wonderful. I was out last night with friends who were talking about, one of them said 5 of her coworkers were fired because they wouldn't get the COVID vaccination. We were all vaccinated and all on the same page. I was like, yeah, I would feel safer if everyone around me were vaccinated. And another person was like, I don't know how necessary it would be that all of my coworkers are vaccinated. So,
well, when you have a child who can't be vaccinated yet.
Yes. And I work I'm a child care provider of an infant, and I'm at my sister has a 3-year-old and 9-month-old twins, and I am visiting her at least once a month. I spent all summer this last year helping her. So the people under 5 are very much top of mind for me in that respect, especially. Gregory,
what's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
I will have to side with Mary along the terms of the vaccines and masks. Sometimes I don't get it. I don't understand I get this is a free country and we get to express our opinions, but then sometimes I wonder, like, how far does that really go when we're kind of dismissing public health?
Yeah.
So I don't understand like the protests and all of that, but I just think definitely it's also important, like the masks and the vaccines and such.
Yeah. Yeah. Gabriella?
This is a hard one. I feel like I can't triple down on the COVID vaccine. I have to throw something else on there. It's a popular opinion that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
Low-rise jeans should come back. I disagree with that.
So do I. Thank you. Should not come back.
I've always been a flare jeans fan. I was trying to bring them back before they were like, yeah, let's bring them back. I was like, no, it was so hard to find a good pair of flare jeans. Mm-hmm. So hard. And when I found them, I was just like, yeah.
American Eagle.
These low-rise, I know, I love
especially if you're a curvy woman like me.
Yeah. But these low-rise jeans, they can take a hike.
Yeah.
I'm going to say no to that one.
I agree emphatically with all three of you. Okay, so the next question starts with Gregory. What piece of art, book, music, movie had a profound impact on you?
I respect Gabriella because she just says, this is a hard question. I never think to say that. I'm always like, okay, the question's here. I've got to say it really quick. But I'm going to say that this is a hard question, but it's a good question. So I'm just going to pull from recent watching the movie Hereditary. I'm a huge horror fan. not gory or anything, but like really psychological horror. I love. But this movie it moved me in many ways, and it transformed me, and it scared the crap out of me. So
was that the Toni Collette movie? Was she?
Yes.
Yeah, I love her.
She's amazing. Yep. Muriel's Wedding. Yep.
Yeah. What did she have on? Was it on Showtime where she played the like multiple personalities?
Yes, I have not seen that.
Yeah, it was really good.
Oh.
It was really good.
Write that down.
But of course, I don't remember the name. It was great, but I don't remember the name. What about you, Gabriella? A piece of art, music, movie that had a profound impact on you?
Okay, I'm so sorry, but you're going to get 3 different mediums here.
Okay.
So visual art, Gustav Klimt's The Kiss. I had to do an essay or like a written response in my English class to it. And it was kind of the first time that I was like, oh, visual art is interesting and moving and dynamic and not boring. There's reasons behind it. So much so, this is my favorite painting, so much so that when I was studying abroad, I made a point to visit Vienna to see it in person. I sat at that museum, I don't even know how long, and I just stared at it like for so long. The colors are beautiful. The gold is just an indescribable gold. It's the most gorgeous textured thing. So if you're ever in Vienna, highly suggest going to see it because they don't let you take pictures.
I've been to Vienna.
Did you see it? You should have seen it.
I don't remember. I know I ate a lot of ice cream.
Oh,
I was
yeah,
like
that's
19,
fun.
20 years old, something like that. But it is a really great city.
Yeah, I like Vienna. They don't let you take pictures. So like they really force you to like, you have
you can't take pictures at any like museum or anything. Like you can
take non-flash.
I don't think so. Can
like
you
on your
take
phone?
non-flash?
Yeah, like on your phone. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm totally like ousting myself. Anyway, okay, so that's visual art. Movies. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Oh my gosh. This is the only movie that I've ever gone to see more than once. I've seen it 6 times in theater. 6 times. There's nothing like watching a movie unfolding before your eyes, like halfway through where you're like, this is my favorite movie. The colors are gorgeous. I already was a fan of West Side Story. Obviously, I forgot her name now, but the woman who plays Anita, she's nominated. She's fantastic. I think the person who played Riff deserved all the awards. Yes, thank you. And Mike Feist, who played Riff, deserves all the awards, and he got it nominated for so few, and it breaks my heart. Anyway, it's musical theater and film just beautifully combined. And then, sorry, I'm giving you another one. Musicals.
Go for it.
Legally Blonde. It's very controversial.
The musical or the movie?
Both, but mostly the musical. It's very controversial. I used to hide my love for it so hardcore, but I actually wrote my college essay about it because I was like, felt ashamed of loving this musical so much. But to this day, like I can sing it for hours. And there's something very powerful and moving about like that empowerment about being a woman, but also like I have blonde hair, but I also have brains. And then as like the diversity movement starting to be more prevalent in like Broadway community, I was like, anyone can play Elle. Like you don't actually have to be like white and blonde. There's a lot of good stuff in that musical. I highly recommend for people to take another look at it.
Yeah, anyway. Now that I think about it, I don't know how you could have answered that question succinctly given who you are.
I'm sorry, yeah.
No, it's funny.
Rapid fire gives 3 paragraphs.
Okay, Mary, what piece of art, book, movie, music had a profound impact on you?
Well, I'm going to take a page out of Gabriella's book and name a few things. The first thing that popped into my mind, I love reading, so it was a book, and it's maybe not one that everyone would say, but it's Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris. Mm-hmm. It is, for my money, the funniest book that's ever been written, and I've read it many times, and I joke that it has, saved my life on occasion, because it's something that I can turn to when I'm having a hard time, and it lifts my spirits because it is so funny, and I've given it to so many people and had almost 100% positive feedback that they also couldn't put it down and couldn't stop laughing. And so thank you, Mr. Sedaris. And then my other favorite book, sort of on the other end of the spectrum, is To Kill a Mockingbird. And because it's I've read, there aren't too many books I've read more than once because there are so many books out there and you got to try and consume as many as you can. But that one I've definitely read more than once as well. And it was the first time I read it, I was in like 8th grade or so, and it made me cry, and so for the written word to touch a person that deeply, it was great. My favorite movie of all time is The Big Chill, which is, it was like, I saw it on TV when I was an adolescent, and it was certainly not geared towards me. It's about, people, college friends, reuniting for one of their friends' funerals. And then they end up spending the weekend together. And I just really thought that's what I want, a community and longtime friends, which I think maybe it resonated with me because I've had friends since I was a baby that are still in my life. And so I thought, oh, I want that to continue. And then when I get to college, to add to that. And it's sort of set the trajectory for my life to community building and creating a network of friends upon which to make family and depend on. And then the other movie that I watched when I was an adolescent was The Miracle Worker with Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke. And I think because Patty Duke's autobiography came out when I was in like 8th grade, and my mother was like, oh yeah, I remember her. She was the youngest person to ever get an Oscar at the time. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. And so I started reading it, and then, went down sort of a rabbit hole and started watching all of her work. And to this day, I watched The Miracle Worker. I would watch it right now, and it inspired me to learn the alphabet and sign language, which now actually benefits me because baby sign, like I work with the infant that I take care of every day on baby sign. And I've sent my sister things to help her kids with baby sign. And so interesting how that came full circle. And then the only other thing I have written down here is that I was in Paris also one time and was with a friend, and I had just discovered the song Nissan Dorm, which I didn't realize was very well known. And we were in a piano bar, but it was a opera singer singing at this piano bar. It was very high end, I guess. And I turned to my friend and I was like, that song that kind of goes, and she was able to think it up. And I was like, oh yes, I'm going to ask if they'll play that because it brings tears to my eyes. It's so beautiful. And so I wrote it down and I gave it to the singer, and he looked at it and he was like, yes, Nissan Dorm. So apparently it was like asking for the girl from Ipanema or something. I didn't realize that it was something that everybody knows and is kind of a cliche to ask for an opera singer to sing. But I think it's so gorgeous.
Gabriella, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
I am an artist.
Mary, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
My independence. I like that I, in many ways, am a majority of one. Not always. It's a struggle. But.
Gregory, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
I'd have to go with perseverance. Through the face of any type of adversity, I always find some silver lining. So I really like that about myself.
Yeah. And last question, Mary, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
You don't have to like everyone, but you have to treat everyone with politeness and civility. My mother said that.
Gregory, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
It's not always about you.
God, yes.
It was monumental when I heard that.
Not everybody's thinking about you as much as you think. That's
exactly.
Really helpful. It's really helpful. Gabriella, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Start wearing eye cream in your 20s. No, I'm just kidding. Wherever you go is where you are.
That is true. That's a great way to end this episode on aging.
Eye cream. Okay. The best advice.
All right. Thank you so much for spending this time in the Waystation with me today. It was a really great conversation. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be able to relate. And I had a great time with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed this.
What a fun conversation with Gregory, Mary, and Gabriella that we had today about aging. I'd love to hear from their different perspectives from like the age of 25 to 52 and just how much they all felt like there was some sort of timeline and these societal pressures to be at certain points. And that really never goes away, right? Like you can be in your 20s and feeling that way. You could be in your 50s and feeling that way. Also really appreciated hearing from Gregory and Mary about their experiences with being sick and how that really changes how you, going forward, treat yourself, treat your body, and look at aging as a privilege. Because it really is, as much as we are told to hide it from the entire world. We're so lucky. And having known people who have passed away at a really young age, it is something that I know is a privilege. And also talking about how the pandemic really was this great leveler for the entire world because we were all forced to put a hold on our lives as we knew it, but we continued to get older and continue to age, obviously, over the past few years, and how it's really sort of forced just a different lifestyle, whether good or bad for a lot of us. And maybe for me, it's been more about introspection. I think that's a word. It sounds weird when I say it, but, really turning inward is my point. And just learning to parent yourself as you get older, right? I think the hard part is that we aren't taught to do that as much when we're younger, taught to talk to people and go to therapy and take care of your body and your mind and your heart. And we are always expecting that others are going to do it for us because they do when we're young. But how that changes when we get older and we have to become a parent to ourselves. So it's really great to explore this universal topic. I hope that you were all able to relate. As always, if you want to keep up to date with the show, see some clips and behind the scenes fun stuff, you can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook as The Waystation Podcast and on Instagram at The Waystation Pod. Thank you so much for joining us in The Waystation again today.